I would like to welcome you to the second session on accelerating the decarbonization of fisheries in the Caribbean. From science-based target to climate mitigation finance. With these few words, I would like to introduce the Honorable Samal Duggins, Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries, Marine Resources, Cooperative, Entrepreneurship, and Creative Economy, St. Kitts and Nevis. Welcome, Mr. Minister.
Good morning. It's a pleasure being here again. To my esteemed colleagues and all of you distinguished guests, allow me to say how much of an honor it is to welcome you again to this side event of the 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States. Today, in this seminar, we will focus on the topic, accelerating the decarbonization of fisheries in the Caribbean, from science-based targets to climate mitigation finance. Today, we are indeed here to address the realities. The reality is that the fisheries and aquaculture sectors contribute lower CO2 emissions per unit output as compared to other protein sources. However, it will take a collective effort from all sectors and all industries globally to address the issue of increasing global temperatures. As small island developing states, we depend upon our ocean resources for economic growth, but rising ocean temperatures are having a very negative impact on our fisheries and marine resources. Increased global temperatures are changing the chemical of our ocean, increasing sea level rise and ocean acidification. It is with this understanding that we must play our part in contributing towards the decarbonization of fisheries and aquaculture in our region, and moving from science-based targets onward to climate mitigation finance. Access to finance is crucial. If the sector is to retool itself and implement critical mitigation and adaptation measures, such as strengthening its resilience, especially in the post-COVID era. Fossil fuel remains the main source of energy to propel our fishing vessels and fish processing facilities, unfortunately. And one area that we can target that is a very low-hanging fruit is to consider suitable emission standards for marine engines used in our fishery sector. Conventional two-stroke engines produce approximately 14 times as much ozone-forming pollution as four-stroke engine, and 25 to 30% of the fuel and oil of two-stroke engine is discharged unburned into the atmosphere. So, encouraging our fishers to use clean burning engines, which provide faster acceleration and improved fuel economy, should be considered as we seek to decarbonize our fisheries and aquaculture sectors. One of the goals of St. Kitts and Nevis is to have an energy sector reliant on renewable energy. Currently, we are focusing on geothermal and solar energy in particular. This means that the carbon footprint of our fishing facilities will be reduced, and it sets the platform for the introduction of electric motors to be used in our region. We must then bridge the gap between ambition and action through innovative climate mitigation finance. This involves leveraging both public and private sector investments to fund projects that enhance energy efficiency, adopt renewable energy sources, and promote sustainable fishing practices. And we stand here today with the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism in its dedication to understanding and addressing the impact of small-scale fisheries on emission. And the goal is that together we can all chart a path towards a sustainable and resilient future for our fisheries and aquaculture sectors of all of our regions. And with that, I wish to welcome all of you to again another side event and another fruitful discussion as we had yesterday, and wish this every success. Thank you. Good morning.
I was told that yesterday. The session was pretty healthy debate, and hopefully we'll have a similar thing happening today. Although fisheries and aquaculture produce lower CO2 emissions per unit output compared to other protein sources, they do contribute to global CO2 emissions, as fossil fuel is the main energy source for fishing vessels. However, access to finance and risk insurance are key to ensuring that the sector can retool itself, while implementation of climate mitigation measures, as well as strengthening resilience, will lead to sustainability. In response to the need to reduce CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gases emission in the fisheries sector, CRFM is keen to better understand the impact on small-scale fisheries on emission. This seminar is intended to strengthen the dialogue on how fisheries and aquaculture sector can contribute positively in terms of sustainability. With these few words, I'll move to introduce our esteemed panelists. My friend, Mr. Milton Haughton, is the Executive Director of the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism Secretariat. He's a graduate of the University of the West Indies, University of Buckingham, London and Metropolitan University, and the University of London. He holds postgraduate qualification in fisheries, general management and law, and has over 42 years of work experience in the fisheries in the Caribbean. I didn't realize you were around that long, Milton. Our next panelist, Mr. Keith Nichols, has 12 years experience with the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center and now serves as the head special projects. He has an extensive background in coastal resource management, marine use management, governance framework for sustainable development, environmental management, protected areas management, climate change, and disaster risk reduction. Another stalwart in the sector and somebody I've known maybe for well over 20 years. Haven't seen him in 20 years too. Just via emails. Our next panelist, Mr. Frédéric Perron-Welch, is an expert in climate change and biodiversity law and policy, with 15 years of experience working with government, intergovernmental organization, companies, non-governmental organizations on climate and biodiversity topics. He is responsible for aligning the Green Initiative standards and service with international obligation and best practice in carbon offsetting, environmental, social, and corporate governance data reporting, and sustainability certification. Welcome to Antigua and Barbuda. I hope your stay has been good so far. And finally, the rose between the thorns. Ms. Cristelle Pratt has over 30 years of policy and practical experience and has worked in both the public and private sector as well as at a national and multilateral level. Cristelle has also served various regional and international organizations, providing strategic policy and technical advice on climate change, risk resilience, and ocean governance. She was honored with the European Women's International Leadership Award 2024. Congratulations, and we look forward to your engagement and your presentation. With these few words, I turn over to the panelists.
I want to really extend a very, very warm welcome to all of you who are here in the room and also to those who are joining online. I am seeing now 39 persons online, so I want to extend a very warm welcome to you who are joining us online. I need to recognize my colleague. I haven't seen him for several years now, Nick, from the UK, also from the University, London Metropolitan University, was associated with the university many years now, and so welcome. Good to see you. Good to see you, Nick. Okay, so my presentation is more a context setting one for our discussion, and You know, the fisheries sector is very important, and we face a lot of challenges. But I believe there is a pathway. There's a pathway for prosperous, sustainable, and resilient fisheries and aquaculture, even in this time of climate change and all the numerous problems and challenges that we face in the fisheries and aquaculture sector. The fisheries sector is very, very important for a number of reasons, including food security and nutrition, employment, generation of foreign exchange, and the livelihood opportunity that the sector provides for a lot of people, especially some of the poor and most vulnerable members of our society. We quite often say that the fisheries sector is our main social security mechanism for people in our countries, and indeed to a great extent I think that statement is true. However, the reality is that our fishing communities are quite vulnerable, quite vulnerable to climate change and the associated impacts. I mean, it's located in the land-water interface, and really, in many cases, our fishing community bears the brunt of tropical storm systems as they come ashore, because they take some of the sting out of these systems as they come ashore. And the reality is that over the years, they have sustained major, significant damages and losses throughout the entire production supply chain system, from the marine resources, the ecosystem, the coastal ecosystem, all the way up to the fishing boats, vessels, gears, the processing establishment, and also the settlement, fishing settlements, and the homes and infrastructure in the fishing communities. And we have recent examples in Dominica, in Bahamas, and I think most of our countries in recent times have experienced some damage and loss from the increasingly severe tropical systems that have impacted us. And on top of that, many of our fishing communities, they already exist at a fairly basic, precarious, vulnerable level. Some of them are among the poorest communities in some of our countries. So they're generally vulnerable. And so improving resilience of the fisheries and aquaculture sector is indeed a high priority for all of us. Now, yesterday I mentioned the numerous challenges that we face in the fisheries sector, from overfishing, pollution, degradation of coastal and marine habitats, weak governance systems, etc., limited and difficulty getting the financing and investment that we need. I won't spend any time on this, but I mention this because when we think about climate change, we need to think about climate change on top of and adding and creating synergy with all these other challenges that we have in the fisheries sector. It is the synergistic impact of all of these things put together that makes it so difficult for our fisheries and marine resources and ocean economy. So indeed, we face many serious challenges. In this slide, I'm really just depicting, and this is taken from the IPCC special report from 2029, but it shows what is happening in the oceans with respect to climate change. So in the middle, you will see the reference to triple threats for the oceans. The greenhouse gases, including and in particular carbon dioxide, but by no means that's the only one. It's warming, increasing the temperature in the atmosphere. Now, the oceans is helping us out big time big time. 90% of the added heat is actually absorbed into the ocean. And I tell you, if the ocean wasn't able to do that, I mean, we would be roasting now. So, we thank God we have, so the ocean that is playing that critical function, but it has negative implications on the ocean, of course. Right. The ocean is also absorbing a lot of the carbon dioxide. Over 25% of the carbon dioxide is being absorbed by the ocean. But there's a problem. The ocean, as it absorbs the carbon dioxide, it is becoming more acidic. And that's a problem. So it is becoming warmer, it is becoming more acidic. And actually, warmer, more acidic means it can carry less oxygen. That's also a problem. So those are the three critical impacts on the ocean and the ocean ecosystems that we rely on for so much benefits to our countries. The greenhouse gases continue to increase in the atmosphere, and so these processes are, according to the expert, actually accelerating rather than decelerating even at this time. Now the result of all of that warming and changes in the chemical composition, particularly the acidity, is sea level rise. Of course, the warm water expands the ocean waters, so we are having sea level rise, and Keith might tell you more about that. Experts and Frédéric, they're experts in climate change, but the sea level is rising, and there are a lot of challenges and problems associated with that, and we touch on that a little more. Then we have the challenges of bleaching of our coral reefs. Major problem, because in many of our countries, most of our countries in the Caribbean, reef fisheries is very, very important. In some cases, it's the main fisheries, reef fisheries. Now, this is fishing taking place on the species that live on the reef. Now, we use the word bleaching, but a better word is killing. The reefs are dying. When we say bleach, I mean they lose the symbiotic algae that lives in it, and basically they become white. So we say they're bleached, but they're dead when they're bleached. So maybe some people do not realize that this is actually killing the reefs. And we have sustained a number of incidents over the past 20, 30 years, and this year is probably going to be another major bleaching event. So I don't know how long the coral reefs can withstand this type of repeated stress and bleaching because of the warmer water. So it's a major concern. And of course, we'll come back to that. But, it's not just that the reefs are dying. It's that everything else associated with the ecosystem, the biodiversity, the fish stocks, and going up the chain, the human activities and the benefits, we're losing all of those with more and more bleaching. All right. We have also seen a bloom in algae, marine algae. We're all used to sargassum. But apart from that, I mean, there are some more serious algal bloom, harmful or toxic algal bloom that is actually increasing because of all these changes in the chemistry in the marine environment, warming, nutrients, and acidity and so on. And these can be very harmful to marine life as well as to human. And we're in this part of the Caribbean, we're familiar with Secretariat. I mean, that's one of the harmful marine algae, but there are several others. And climate change is only accelerating these incidents of harmful algal bloom globally. So the trend, is upward. And of course, even though it's not only harmful algae that's blooming, I mentioned sargassum already. That's another marine algae that is blooming and creating a whole lot of problems for us in the Caribbean region. These massive blooms are continuing. The trend is upward since it started in 2011. In 2011, there was a big uproar about the bloom, but the blooms are now significantly larger than what we experienced in 2011, the first time we had that massive bloom. I believe in 2011 the biomass average month might have been about 2 million metric ton. Now it is almost between 18 to 20 million metric ton blooming each month. So it's a significant change. But then we also have the impacts on marine habitats. So we mentioned coral reefs already, but there are a whole lot of other habitats from the seaweeds, tilapia, various seaweed, seagrass beds, and the mangroves, etc. And the marine species that are associated with them that are being impacted negatively. And then this whole issue of acidification. Unfortunately, it doesn't receive as much attention as it should. We pay a lot of attention to warming water, but much less so to the impacts, the implication, the consequences of the increasingly acidic water that we are contending with. But they have an impact on a lot of marine organisms, those that have shell, whether it is clams, oysters, lobster, conch, plankton, crustacean, shrimp, etc. I mean, these things that have these shells have been affected. And then also, of course, the disruption in fisheries and the implication for livelihoods. So I've mentioned some of these already, but the fact is climate change is affecting fisheries big time. Fisheries and aquaculture big time. Via the warming, the acidification, also the changes in ocean circulation. And in recent times, they have been hearing a lot, and scientists have been sounding the alarm about the changes in the ocean circulation system, because this could have major implication. Now, the changes are already taking place, and a part of the reason why we have the sargassum inundating our beaches is believed to be partly because of more smaller but still significant changes in the ocean's circulation. That's allowing leakage of the sargassum from the Atlantic Ocean and bringing it across onto our beaches and in our coastal water. So the change in ocean circulation is actually quite significant. And then, of course, we have the increased frequency and severity of extreme events, extreme storm events, and apart from the problems with the surf and wind and water coming ashore and creating havoc in our coastal areas, we also have issues, and from fisheries, issues of low salinity, because they have a lot of fresh water and river runoff, and these can cause major problems. I remember about maybe 20 years ago, or maybe even a little more than that, when we had this massive fish kill from the Guyana coast all the way up to Puerto Rico, I believe. Massive fish kill. And it turned out to be because of a huge infusion of fresh water from the South American river system, Mississippi, Amazon, and so on. And the bacteria, freshwater bacteria, in that plume of water that was affecting our reef fishes, and there was a Streptococcus inei was the name of the freshwater bacteria that was infecting the fish, and causing this massive fish kill. So when you have low salinity water and water that is contaminated, these things are associated with putting the marine organisms in the ecosystem under severe stress, and in some cases lead to fish kills. The increased turbidity in the water. So when you have all this fresh water from heavy rainfalls inland caused by climate change, a lot of sediment, of course, in addition to the pollutants, pesticides, etc., all ending up in the marine environment, and they're causing damage in the marine environment, impacting on fisheries. So the warming water affects fish distribution, migration, and the whole population dynamics, the breeding, the growth, the mortality, the abundance, the distribution of the fish stocks are affected. And these all have implication for our food security. Lobster, for example, normally spawn at 27 degrees centigrade. If they do not have that, if the temperature is elevated or if it's low, the spawning will be reduced significantly, or they don't spawn at all. And so most fish have some range within which they are able to reproduce, and not to mention the pollution and all these other things that also impact on the reproductive capacity spawning of our marine species. So these are major problems. But one of the things that the experts tell us is that with climate change and with warming waters, we're probably going to see a decline in tropical species because fewer can tolerate the warmer water. And what you're seeing is a north and southward drift or shift in fish, because they will go and try to stay with the water temperature that is suitable for their metabolism, function. Just like us, I mean, they don't have air conditioning, so they have to go with the water that is more suited for their functioning. So that could have implication for local fishers and for our food security. The composition, species composition of the fish, that's also changing. Some are thriving because they can tolerate the changes better. Others are declining. So what we have is a major imbalance in the system overall that is upsetting the whole ecosystem. And honestly, at this point, we really don't understand what is going on. We know there are changes. We see some of them, but a lot of changes are taking place at this time, and they are all affecting the system. So, and that is would have implication for us going forward. And I mentioned already the importance of coral reef as habitat for our fish population. The fact is, there are many species that need a coral reef to spawn, to live. It's nursery, well, a coral reef, the seagrass bed, mangrove. It's all of them. They all have very critical function in terms of supporting a healthy fish population. And then the issue of the acidification. And I saw this term, it's just think about osteoporosis in people. That's what is happening. That is what climate change and the more acidic water is causing. So basically, it's the more acidic water it results in the minerals used by shellfish and whether crustaceans or mollusks or whatever, anything that has shell and skeleton to basically dissolve away. I mean, at the end of the day, that is what is happening. Or they need to expend much more energy making their shells and maintaining, keeping their shells. And so, they become vulnerable, susceptible to disease and all type of things. And, it upset their whole biology. So acidic water is weakening the exoskeleton and skeletal formation, shell formation of so many species. Now, the important thing about the marine environment is that it's a web. right? And some of these things are at the base of the web. So if you destroy or degrade the base on which the ecosystem, the other marine species, whether fish and other preferred species and reptiles and mammals and so on, all depend. If you remove the base, if you degrade the base, then everything will be affected, and that is, I think, that is what is happening. The whole balance has been disturbed, and the graph you see there shows the trend as from 1985 until now, the change in acidity. So it's showing the pH gradually going down, and you know, from the industrialization period in the 1850s, 60s, thereabout, what you see is a gradual but continuing trend of decline in the acidity of the water. So we also have these extreme events that I think we're all familiar with, and the impact that they're having on the fisheries sector. The boats, the fishing gears, the infrastructure, as well as the marine habitat, the coral reefs also are degraded and damaged and destroyed by these severe weather systems. Aquaculture facilities are easily destroyed during storms. You know, I have a good friend in Belize who, after 2 years, 2 hits in frequent succession, you know, he basically had to give up his aquaculture operation. Storms very often introduce pathogens in the aquaculture system, and you know, that's one of the weaknesses in aquaculture, and it's becoming more vulnerable because of climate change. And a few years ago, Belize aquaculture production was basically wiped out because of a disease infestation, and the industry basically had to close everything, and they're trying to rebuild. And rebuilding is very difficult. It takes years to get your industry up to level. At the peak, they were producing like $50 million worth of aquaculture exporting, and that went to zero. Major economic impact, and you know, job losses and so on, because of these things. Right. Okay, so we can move on to the next slide. So in the next few slides, I'll be looking at the policy and strategic framework, etc. So for the reasons that I've mentioned so far, climate change is a high priority for our country. It's an existential issue for us as small island developing states. For some people, you know, it's, well, political football, but for us, it is really major priority, and our governments have really been investing the little resources that we have in addressing this and trying to mobilize attention, support at the international level. So we have the Regional Climate Change Center, and Keith is on the center. Will tell you more about what they're doing. It's a key institution, key mechanism established by our governments to lead and spearhead our climate response, adaptation, mitigation, etc. But you also have SEDEMA, the Disaster Emergency Management Authority, looking at protecting our assets, especially the built infrastructure, and keeping people safe from these severe systems that impact us. CRFM is a part of our portfolio. It's an important part, especially working and promoting issues related to the fishery sector. Now, we have developed, in collaboration with SEDEMA and 5C, a regional strategy and action plan on climate change adaptation and disaster risk management in the fishery sector. And that, you know, is like a policy statement, policy document guiding our response. And very importantly, we have the Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy that I mentioned yesterday. And one of the key protocols under it, there's a whole protocol dealing with adaptation to climate change and disaster risk management, dealing with disaster risk management in the fishery sector. So those are the key policy instruments guiding our actions in the fishery sector. And of course, our strategic plan of 2022 to 2030 also includes a strategic objective addressing climate change and provisions to deal with climate change, because it is so important. Of course, when I say climate change, normally we have to think of climate change and disaster risk management and preparation, etc. So even though I say sometimes fisheries, usually I mean fisheries and aquaculture, and climate change, we always have to think about not just climate change but the adaptation and preparedness. Right. So we're thinking about the resilient future for fisheries and aquaculture. These are some of the key instruments. Number 3 on this is the risk insurance for the fisheries sector. And yesterday we had a discussion about insurance and financing for the fisheries sector. And we will be hearing more about the financing challenges, etc. But one of the things that we have been working on for some years now is the issue of risk insurance for the fisheries. This is critical because we have to spread the risk. It's just unsustainable for when you have these disasters for a government to find the money almost every year now to with bailing out the industry. So the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Segregated Portfolio Company, we all know it as CRIF. We have been working with them for a number of years now to put in place a parametric insurance scheme, which is a scheme that the government would buy for the fishers, but there's also a private insurance component to the whole initiative. But it has still been piloted. I mean, the Coast Caribbean Ocean and Aquaculture Sustainability Facility, Coast. That's what the policy is called, the Coast policy. It was developed by CRFM, the World Bank, with support from the State Department of the United States. They contributed some funds, and were able to work together to make some progress here. Now, in my opinion, this is very, very important. So St. Lucia and Grenada, they have been piloting the scheme since 2019, 2020. We had a meeting a few months ago, and one of the things that is unfortunate is that we have not been able to test the policy, how it works, and to see the payout, because in these countries we have not had any problems triggering the payment. But that is good, and perhaps better. But it's a policy still being developed, and they're trying to refine it based on the experience gained in St. Lucia and Grenada. The CRIF is now really trying to scale up and to reach out to more countries, to get more Caribbean countries on board. Because at the end of the day, in my opinion, I mean, this is very important. It's much better to get the insurance, have that protection, so that if we have a worst case scenario, we can get some funding to support recovery and rebuilding of the sector. Of course, the insurance is always quite complicated, and CRIF is a private operation, so those are some of the challenges. We still have some way to go, but insurance is very important. Another thing about the insurance that I should mention, the CRIF, the Coast policy, is that it is seeking to provide protection, but it is also incentivizing the implementation and compliance with best practices, in particular the principles and key measures laid out in the Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy. So the more countries are implementing climate smart, good practice and practices to ensure sustainability, the lower their premium will be, and I think a little higher their payouts will be. So it is designed in a way to incentivize and encourage climate smart practices and sustainable practices in the fishery sector. Quite an interesting arrangement. Okay, and so just a couple of the, well, a few of the key projects that we are involved with that focus on climate change. Now, we have had a number of projects in recent times, over recent years, addressing climate change, because I told you climate change was and have been prioritized by our governments for some time now. So, we have had a number of projects, recent one, the PPCR project, the CC for fish project, and others. But earlier this year, we got funding for a Canadian-funded project called Starfish, Sustainable Technologies for Adaptation and Resilience in the Fisheries Sector. We are in the process of implementing a New Zealand-funded project aimed at dealing with sargassum, developing commercial products from sargassum seaweed. So it's developing sargassum products for climate resilience. I mean, that's what it is. So we have the sargassum and these other algal bloom. We're trying to, instead of just let them be a problem and a nuisance, trying to use them in a valuable way, beneficial way, to create jobs and create products that we need. And then we have the GEF funded Blue Economy project called the BCLME Plus project, promoting national blue economic priorities through marine spatial planning, MPA, and value chain development. Again, climate change is all over that project still. And then we have a small project that Frédéric will be talking about, because we contracted them to assist with this, and it's the carbon footprint assessment of a fishery in Belize as a pilot, and leading to decarbonization to the extent that we're able to move towards carbon neutral fisheries or low carbon fisheries. So you will hear a little more about that. And then there is the Road to Resilience project, DCF, and Keith. We're working with the 5Cs to develop and implement this project. So the PPG grant has been approved, and we're now going to be moving towards developing the project document. So those are, just a few of the projects. So in conclusion, climate change is accelerating and affecting our oceans and as well as our inland aquatic systems. And it's bringing about major changes in the ecosystems, and overall, a lot of these are negative changes. So we're seeing all type of negative changes. I won't go through them again, but it is something we have to pay very careful attention to. And tropical fish production is expected to decline. That's a very important message. And so, we have to be careful and implement adaptation actions to address the challenges that we're having now and that we anticipate in the future. But, there are many things we can do to secure a sustainable and resilient future for our fisheries. So we need to be working together in a concerted, coordinated, multidisciplinary, multi-sectorial way to address the many challenges, because this requires all of government, all of community approach and regional cooperation for us to address the numerous challenges. But maintaining the resilience of the ecosystem is something we have to pay attention to. There's no way around it. The ecosystems have been impacted, and we need to adopt ecosystem-based approaches and do the things that we can to rebuild and protect our mangroves, for example. Mangroves are so important in offering shoreline protection and reducing the more severe impacts of storm surges and so on, and even capturing sediments and runoff from the land. So many ways. Of course, we talk a lot about the ecosystem, the coral reef ecosystem. Again, we have to do all we can, and there are things, practical things we can do. So we have to pay attention to that. We also have to spread the risk, through livelihood diversification. I mentioned the risk insurance, and we need public-private sector partnerships. So planning and preparedness, again, is a must. There's a lot that we can achieve in terms of protecting ourselves if we're able to think about what we're facing and put in place just common sense plans so that we know what to do, how to act when we're facing some of these severe weather systems, for example, and empowering local communities. I think that is so important, and very often, we do a lot of things at the national level and don't pay attention to the local community. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that each local community has the resources, the knowledge, the system, because let me tell you, in the worst case scenario, when you have a severe storm and many of these communities become isolated, it is the local action at the local level that will make the difference and save lives in those critical moments. So our local communities, our fishing communities need to be hardened. They need to have safe areas where, in worst case scenario, they can gather, stay there, and be safe, and empowered and know what to do, and organize, and the nurses and medical practitioners, whatever, whoever you have there, know what to do, and people know where to go, what they can do to protect themselves and prepare themselves for, even food and water and simple things like that. Very, very important. And I think this is my final slide now. So number of other things we need to do. We have to use the available technology to have really robust warning system, and I think we have improved a lot in this area to share information and to facilitate communication regarding what's happening. Fishing vessels need to be rendered more suitable for the new environment that we're operating in. So they need to be more stable, larger, safer, etc., to protect the livelihoods and the life of people who are operating. And they also need to be able to go a little further. Most of our vessels in the region are small vessels, open vessels with outboard motors, and really they just don't have the capacity or the design to take people safely out in deep water. So we have to look at that. I know in Antigua and Barbuda, you have upgraded your fleet quite a bit over the past 30, 40 years, quite a bit. So, but in many other countries, that's not the case. And as the minister mentioned earlier, we need to accelerate the transition towards more fuel efficient and renewable energy technology in the fishery system, on the boats, in the storage, distribution, processing, establishment, etc. So we still have a long way to go in this area along the entire fishery supply chain. Underwater types remained intact, and fishers were able to go and to catch fish around them, especially in the immediate aftermath of the hurricane, and they still were able to get fish to feed the community, and some communities that were isolated from this side. So this is just an example of a climate smart fishing approach, that can be very helpful. And of course, building, or in some cases rebuilding, our safe harbors, shelters, piers, jetties, etc., and fisheries infrastructure, recognizing the threat that our countries face with climate change and these severe weather systems. So investing in aquaculture and climate smart aquaculture practices, including breeding of species that can thrive in the new environment, the changing environment that we are entering into. Of course, with aquaculture, you have to think about proper zoning and design of your system to resist the storms that we expect. And critically now, we also have to invest in improving data, knowledge, and information about our fisheries and marine system. This is so important going forward. Things are changing fast, and unless we can keep up with understanding the changes and the implications, it's going to be very difficult for us. So we have to invest like we have never done before in research and data collection and monitoring and accessing traditional knowledge about our fisheries system and our marine ecosystem, and use all of that use all of that to make decision, to plan and to make decision. And of course, the important financing challenges that you're going to hear more about the other presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much. That was an overview to establish the context for our discussion dealing with decarbonization and financing. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Honorable Minister, colleagues at the high table, thank you for having me here. My name is Frédéric Perron-Welch. I'll be presenting a case that we did with the CRFM, which is the National Fishermen's Cooperative Society in Belize, where we've done a carbon footprint of their Caribbean spiny lobster fishery. Green Initiative worked with the CRFM to assess the carbon footprint of the National Fishermen's Cooperative Society in Belize. The objective was to help them begin internalizing international climate action best practices in their spiny lobster value chain through first footprint assessment, second mitigation recommendations, and third, ideally, a climate certification through Green Initiative. The NFCS has over 500 cooperative members who deliver their artisanal catches to the cooperative's plant for processing, freezing, and boxing. These harvests are essentially quite close to the shore in the shallow waters of Barrier Reef and offshore atolls in Belize. And the fishermen largely use either wooden sailboats or fiberglass skiffs. And although some of the product is consumed in Belize, the majority is exported to the United States and Asia. This is an overview of the footprinting process. So we first began by defining the scope of the work, by essentially establishing which emission sources we'd be looking at based on the organization's operations and the data that they had available. We then designed our calculation tool, so essentially identifying those sources and collecting information. Once we collected the information, we then validated the technical consistency of that information, and subsequently we obtained and analyzed these initial results to prepare a detailed carbon footprint report. As you'll see here, there's an overview of the types of emission sources that we were looking at. So they're broken up into 3 different categories. Scope 1 are essentially the internal emissions that can be found within the company. Scope 2 are emissions related to electricity consumption and generation, while Scope 3 are essentially outside of the operations of the company, but are emissions that are linked to generating its products. So whether business travel, commuting, transporting raw materials, some of the emissions for producing fuels, paper consumption, so for the cardboard boxes that the cooperative uses, and methane from decomposition of solid waste. We generated the carbon footprint. We were able to determine that the cooperative had just under 800 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year in terms of emissions, which is actually quite a low amount. It's distributed between the 3 scopes that I just mentioned. The highest emissions were actually from Scope 2, which are from electricity generation. And this isn't necessarily that surprising because in the Caribbean, the Central American region, a lot of the power is fossil fuel generated, and the fishermen, because they're using artisanal methods, are really not necessarily generating that much of a carbon footprint. We then broke it down according to those 15 sources that we had earlier, and as you'll see here, electricity consumption by the production plant is actually the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and you also have the fourth largest is losses in transmission and distribution. So there's actually quite a significant opportunity there in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of the fisheries if we just look at improving that electricity generation, whether through buying solar panels for their operations or finding a specialist producer of cleaner electricity. We then have quite a lot of fuel consumption by mobile sources, and this will be essentially for those two-stroke or four-stroke engines that we were talking about. And there are some opportunities there as well, given that we are looking at the use of quite a lot of two-stroke engines that could be upgraded in different ways. Using the carbon footprint, what we were able to do is create a core indicator, which is the amount of kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilo of product. And we were able to establish that based on the harvest, that there's an indicator of just under 3 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilo of product. And we, in our research, were able to find that some fisheries, especially ones that are reliant on being at sea much longer, have up to 10 times the carbon emissions of this fishery. So given that the fishery is quite close to shore and traditional methods are being used, it's actually a very low carbon fishery as it is, which makes it a bit challenging in terms of decarbonizing further, but we were then able to develop some recommendations on that as well. The first recommendation is a fairly standard one, which is to develop a climate policy. And as part of that policy, to develop a climate action plan for the next 6 years. So going to 2030, where there's an international goal of reducing emissions by 50% by 2030. We then would help them establish corporate reduction targets that are specific to particular aspects of their operations. Making sure that they track results on an annual basis and demonstrate those results through our online platform. We proposed that they further communicate their progress at both national and international levels and implement those decarbonization actions that we've established through the action plan and the corporate reduction targets. One critical issue is to essentially enhance data collection so that in further rounds of footprinting and certification, that the organization itself has largely done the data collection and that it's more a question of validation rather than having to go all the way back through the entire process again and recreating a footprint. As I mentioned, one key recommendation was to try to transition to clean energy sources. And that's either by investing in your own infrastructure, for example, by buying solar panels to supply electricity directly to the factory, or to purchase clean energy from specialized providers if that's an opportunity. There's also the need to explore cleaner energy sources for fishing vessels on a case-by-case basis. One way in which to do this is to increase the efficiency of the engines, which would be moving from a two-stroke to a four-stroke engine. That will inherently reduce your emissions because you're burning less fuel. But there may also be opportunities, for example, to use biofuel, which would then have a lower carbon footprint than fossil fuels, or gradually move towards electric propulsors if that's a possibility, although that will be certainly more expensive. And of course, importantly, reinforcing communications on climate actions with clients and partners, because that helps to further enhance the fisheries competitiveness and visibility in global value chains that are looking for low carbon sources of fisheries products. And with that, I'd like to conclude, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. Honourable Minister, colleagues at the head table, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends who haven't seen me for 20 years. I've been given 7 minutes to provide a sort of umbrella picture of leveraging regional international partnerships for attaining science-based climate targets in the fisheries and aquaculture sectors of Caribbean SIDS. Now, like I said, I have 7 minutes. I'm going to challenge myself to keep within the 7 minutes. And thanks, the presentation by Milton provides a very comprehensive overview of the challenges we face today with climate change. It's a bleak picture, and it's worse than what he's pointed out. Trust me, it's getting worse on a day-by-day basis. So, yes, Milton, yes, but it is a lot more serious than we realize. When someone says they were diving here in Antigua and got to 30 feet, the temperature was 86.5 degrees Fahrenheit. This is unprecedented. This is extremely warm oceans, and our resources can't survive in those temperatures. As Milton indicated, they live within a very narrow tolerance range. Anything outside of that will be lethal to them. So we are in serious, serious trouble. What can we do about it? Not too sure. We contribute very little to emissions globally, and that's a region itself. So when you might have heard of the 1.5 to stay alive. Anyone has not heard of that campaign? 1.5 to stay alive? I see some nods. I know some of you have. And this was popularized in 2015, the Paris COP. Made very popular then. It means that we have to aim towards a temperature increase that's no more than a 1.5 degrees Celsius target. In actual fact, we surpassed 1.5 degrees Celsius last year. We went over 2 degrees Celsius, but then El Nino contributes to those elevated temperatures we had as well. A 1.5, any increase of the 1.5 beyond, of course, the industrialization period is detrimental to our well-being, to the ecosystems on which we depend. And we are very near that 1.5 degree threshold. So as far as we're concerned, this region contributes minuscule amounts to climate change. Climate change was always there. It always existed. The world exists because of climate change. That's why we have seasons and everything else, etc. The world exists because of climate change. What we're seeing are the impacts of accelerated climate change because of industrialization, the emissions and the greenhouse gases that Milton spoke to, our nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide, methane, which is the most potent greenhouse gas. And we're pumping lots of those into the atmosphere. So it's a lot worse for us because there is no end in sight. We're still pursuing the fossil fuels, and we're still pushing industry that pump methane gas, and methane is also naturally occurring gas. So as we see the melt in the Arctic, methane is also being released. They're natural sources. So we're in trouble, really, really trouble. So providing science-based targets for fisheries implies we've got to do what we can to reduce our carbon footprint, as the minister said in his address this morning. So Milton made mention of fisheries and aquaculture. That defines the industry as we know it. Fisheries would focus on decarbonizing. The minister made mention, and Milton as well, of the need to transition to more efficient engines. The two-stroke fossil fuel-based engines are very inefficient, emissions into the air. Now, this is not our contribution to global emissions reduction. Yeah, we have an obligation, yes. We do have an obligation. But this is primarily to reduce the carbon footprint of the sector for our own economic benefit. So the context is we're doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for ourselves. Aquaculture, on the other hand, will look more towards electrification, more renewable energy sources of power. We are looking to reduce the carbon footprint of the entire fishery sector for our own benefit because there are economic advantages in pursuing those goals and those targets. The fisheries in the Caribbean is mainly artisanal. I think Milton gave you a very long description of what that sector looks like. So it means that we're not the heavy industrialized fisheries that use, we're out at sea for days and weeks on the end, and we're exploiting the resources in a manner that we can't even dream of in the Caribbean. But we're still small. So it means that notwithstanding that as a region, our footprint, carbon footprint, is small compared to the rest of the world, fisheries is even smaller. Yet the transitions we need to make are for our economic benefit, as I said earlier. So aquaculture is relatively small within the region as well. We don't have the land mass, we don't have the water resources, and now we're in a major drought situation. And aquaculture relies on water, fresh water. We don't have water. Every country in this Caribbean has declared a water emergency, from Jamaica down to, including Guyana. And Dominica, which is the land of many rivers, also has a water emergency as well because of the prolonged drought. So we're now coming out of that. So aquaculture, or the future of aquaculture is dependent, unless of course we're doing mariculture, marine-based aquaculture. If we are freshwater dependent, then there's a problem. Belize right now, where I'm based, has been dry for the past few weeks. Or Milton as well would tell you. And for months, there have been bushfires of an unprecedented nature. All of Mexico, the Central America, Guatemala, Belize is dry. We're breathing smoke every single day. The entire, half the country is covered by a layer of smoke because of bushfires. The forests are burning, the fields are burning. And yesterday was a meeting with SEDIMA to try to determine what do we do to reduce the impact of that smoke inhalation. It's dry, there's no signs of rain. I came in on Saturday and I woke to the sound of thunder and lightning on Sunday morning. I said, wow, we could do with a bit of that. I said, first thunder and lightning storm in months. It felt good to hear it. You did. And we could do a bit of that in Belize. So if we have reduced rainfall and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, these are the scientists who sit together and look at projections all over the world. They are saying that this region is getting drier. So we'll have the torrential downpours, heavy rain events that will cause landslides and flooding everything. And we're seeing those, but it's getting drier. So what's the future for aquaculture based on freshwater hold for us? That's indeterminate. So we have those issues to confront as we seek to reduce the footprint, the carbon footprint of the fishery sector. So notwithstanding, we are trying to establish science-based targets for the development of the sector. We have the realities that we need to consider. Next slide, please. In our own development, and that's Milton's problem. It's also our collective problem as well, because we don't exist in silos. So we all have a role to play to finding the solutions to the challenges. Some of those are external and difficult to address. Milton spoke a lot about the stressors. I'm not going to go into those stressors. He spoke about the pollution, the heat, the ocean acidification, etc. There's a problem we need to address is our weak governance. And notwithstanding, governance is not as strong as it should be everywhere within the region. We're now transitioning to a blue economy program within the Caribbean. And someone said we shouldn't be called small island developing states. We should be called large ocean small island developing states. Because our ocean masses are much more significant than the actual size of our physical land mass itself. But that's the base of our economy, and we haven't utilized that space as much as we should. So even while we're transitioning to blue economy, we need to have strong governance systems to help us transition to a more efficient blue economy program for our own economic benefits. So possible partnerships. And so how do we finance the transition from where we are today to where we want to go? It's not always easy for fisheries, because fisheries is a high-risk sector. And Milton spoke about the parametric insurance and the CRIF that they're trying to organize for the sector. This is after many years of trying to get some sort of fisheries or insurance program for fisheries. But the one instrument that could be used is what is called the NDCs, Nationally Determined Contributions, where countries are obligated to reporting to the UNFCCC on their contribution to emissions reductions. And this is where the transition, or at least the move towards more efficient engines in the fisheries sector, will benefit us within the region. Now, I know there are advances in electric outboard engines or whatever we need to find. I'm not saying that that is the solution. I don't think that's been around long enough to be able to determine the effectiveness of those electric outboard engines. And those of you who follow the EV, renewable energy, and the EV trend today in cars and so on, realize that there's a transition to other aspects beyond cars itself, beyond vehicles. So, but that's a potential opportunity, and that's something that needs to be explored. But in the economics, EVs are more expensive than the petrol-based alternative. So we need to blend with the blue economy. That goes without saying. Fisheries is part of the blue economy. So how we articulate a blue economy program is necessary to secure the type of investments in fisheries that we require. Milton spoke to assessing our risks. It is a high-risk area, but also priorities. And every risk provides an opportunity for development. So we need to be solution-oriented. We need to find a way of looking at those challenges and see how can we reposition ourselves to address the challenges? How can we find the financing? But there are instruments, like I said, and that's the NDCs. And there is an NDC partnership, an institution set up to help provide finances to emission reduction type investments in the region. And that is the one opportunity I think that may present itself to helping with the finances for transitioning to a low carbon fishery sector. There's also national adaptation plans. Milton did mention of a few of the projects that are working towards adaptation. That is a given. We have to adapt to changing conditions. Ecosystem-based approaches. Milton, I didn't hear you mention that one. Maybe you did. But ecosystem-based approaches, something we've been doing for a while, but we need to challenge our own thinking and how we can make that more effective for us as well. And of course, multi-partner project submissions. CRFM is already working on projects together with the 5 Cs. We've already received approval of one particular project and hopefully others soon to help advance the changes we want to see in the fishery sector. So that's my contribution to the discussions. Thank you.
Honourable Minister, hello, panelists, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. A very good morning to you all. I'd like to thank CRFM for inviting the Organisation of African, Caribbean and Pacific States to participate in this important side event. It's always hard to be the last speaker because, you know, of course, everybody and everything has been said, and we've had, you know, 3 extremely eloquent presentations by our previous speakers and an excellent keynote by the Honourable Minister. And so I will sound like I'm repeating quite a number of things, but nevertheless, I'm going to do that because I think it's important. So for many SIDS, often coined, and Keith has already touched on this, often coined as large ocean island states, the ocean is central with the fisheries and aquaculture sectors a priority as they serve to address food security and nutrition, prosperity and well-being. SIDS cultures, heritage and traditions are also intertwined with the ocean and with its resources. And as I speak, I will use SID sometimes, and I will use OW sometimes, because I'm from a small island developing state. I'm from Fiji. So you'll hear SID sometimes and OW sometimes, because I am an islander. But for some time now, climate change remains the pervasive challenge for SIDS, sustainability and resilience aspirations. SIDS being at the front line and already feeling the full force of the climate emergency, notwithstanding contributing the least to the problem. SIDS endure severe loss and damage, which manifest in many forms, including destroyed production assets and infrastructure, economic and livelihood losses, loss of lives and forced displacement, and productivity declines and degraded marine ecosystems, as we heard from both Milton and Keith. So building resilient fisheries and aquaculture sectors in SIDS is an assured way of enhancing island communities' resilience to climate change-related risks, as well as other exogenous shocks. The foundations for climate-resilient fisheries lie in ensuring that, firstly, the natural assets on which economic activity depend are secure, well-managed and productive. Secondly, the dependent communities have an enhanced capacity to manage and reduce all risks, including adapting and mitigating climate change, as well as disaster risk reduction. So financing sustainable fisheries management, upgrading infrastructure to withstand climate impacts, and deploying advanced innovative technologies, including renewable energy and risk-informed early warning systems, are now urgent priorities to ensure SIDS peoples and communities can live free and worthwhile lives. The landscape of current financing instruments deployed to build resilience and sustainable fisheries and aquaculture sectors are diverse. And Keith did put up a slide on that. And these come from national public finance, including blue bonds, from grants, including overseas development assistance, if one's income status allows, from the GEF, the GCF, and global funds for coral reefs, ocean innovation, from multilateral development banks, such as through the World Bank's Pro-Blue and the European Investment Bank's Blue Sustainable Ocean Strategy, from private philanthropy, and from private investment financing and impact financing. However, in saying this, that finance is inadequate and not terribly easy to access for SIDS. And it isn't matching the expanding needs of SIDS. And this is why we cannot fully discuss the subject of financing climate resilience in fisheries and aquaculture without placing it in the global context of climate justice. SIDS countries have been at the forefront and have demonstrated leadership in calling for urgent and scaled-up climate ambition to align with the Paris climate objectives of not reaching the 1.5 degree Celsius temperature limit to stay alive. And I think, Keith, you more eloquently presented this, but nevertheless, these are in my notes that I wrote this morning. And so to ensure action is implemented on the ground, SIDS have developed ambitious nationally determined contributions, or NDCs as we know them, together with national adaptation plans, which are conditional on external support. In fact, our estimates are that SIDS require $28.7 billion US annually to 2030 to implement their NDCs. And SIDS must use their NDCs as a key opportunity to secure resources to build resilient societies and economies. In their current NDCs, SIDS identify the energy, agriculture and sustainable transport sectors for their main climate mitigation measures, and coastal zone management and fisheries as their key adaptation sectors. The OACPS SIDS Forum is preparing to convene a SIDS-led resource mobilisation conference for financing NDCs in 2025. And we see this as a direct contribution to supporting SIDS efforts to implement the Antigua and Barbuda action for SIDS, which will be a key outcome of this the SIDS 4 conference. Their commitments under the Paris Agreement, and ultimately to address meeting many of the goals of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. As I have already mentioned, but I think it's worth reiterating here, despite contributing the least greenhouse gas emissions, yet bearing the brunt of climate change impacts, SIDS countries face higher costs of capital as they seek funding for blue-green projects to ensure a just transition due to their income status, and also an international financing system that was built at a time when climate change and other crises had not been fully revealed. The conundrum we find ourselves in is if SIDS have to foot much of the bill to adapt to and to mitigate climate change, they worsen the ocean of debt which they are wallowing in now, and which may in fact sink SIDS before the rising sea levels, another problem they did not cause. We are now faced with the debt, climate, ocean, biodiversity, and we could go on, nexus, that must find urgent and sustainable solutions for financing SIDS resilience, including in the fisheries and aquaculture sectors. And this is why the Organisation of African, Caribbean and Pacific States, the OACPS, supports the Bridgetown Initiative 2.0, as championed by Barbados's Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, which seeks to reform financing and at scale commensurate with the climate change shocks and challenges faced by SIDS and other vulnerable developing countries of the OACPS. Clearly, relying on GNI per capita as the sole criteria for access to concessional finance is not appropriate for our times. We need new approaches and revamped financing mechanisms to facilitate access to concessional development financing so that our members can navigate recurring climate crises. To inform this process, the OACPS is developing a climate vulnerability and resilience index as an innovative tool to inform the debate on allocating financial resources to build resilience. Our aim today is not to only shed light on the multifaceted nature of vulnerability, but also highlight the important role of innovative vulnerability indices as credible complementary tools in shaping the financing mechanisms that respond to current development challenges for SIDS and ensure the requisite resources are provided so SIDS can achieve sustainability and build resilience. OACPS, as an organisation, drawing membership from 79 Africa, Caribbean and Pacific states, of which 39 members are SIDS, is uniquely positioned to facilitate intra-regional ACP-SIDS cooperation and collaboration to build our resilience and prosperity. and to work closely together to see how we make concrete contributions to solving and addressing some of the impacts faced by the global climate emergency. Because we have stewardship over 30% of the blue planet. This needs to be recognised, acknowledged, appreciated and supported by traditional and new partners. Genuine and durable partnerships between SIDS regions and between SIDS and other partners need to be built, or where they are already built on and strengthened. In addition, as an early step towards agreeing how we implement the ABAS, I understand it's going to be called that, the Antigua and Barbuda Action for SIDS, in respect of our ocean initiatives, including fisheries and aquaculture, OACPS ministers in charge of oceans, inland waters and fisheries will meet for the 8th time in Tanzania from the 9th to the 13th of September. And we trust that our Caribbean members and regional agencies will be actively present and participating. We need for SIDS a collective effort to strengthen our institutions, our instruments for effective implementation. We should aim to reap dividends by pooling our efforts and resources to address the global crises we face, by turning some of our approaches on their head. So I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
As with most things, as in the case of fisheries, particularly when it comes to small island developing states, grassroots initiative has been the basis for much of our response to complex issues. So the question I pose to any one of the panelists off the bat, how do we have a just transition that is people-centered and pro-poor? Normally, we're just the consumers of the technology, whether it be engines, freezers. How do we deal with that issue? How do we get them to the table?
Thank you so much, Chair. And that's an excellent question to start us off. So I'd like to ask which one of our panelists would like to respond. Milton.
It's a very, very important question. And the issue of equity and good governance and making sure we understand the different stakeholders that should be involved is very, very important. How we do it, it's difficult, but it starts with proper policy and ensuring that we have the type of consultative processes that will ensure that we are hearing and listening to the voices of all of our stakeholders. And a matter as important as what we're dealing with here, it's extremely important that we make every effort to consult with the people and the different stakeholders, including the most vulnerable and the marginalized and the less visible and the poor, and not just with the powerful and the rich and the influential. We really need to make sure we have robust processes to engage with our people and to get their input and factor that into the decision-making process. Otherwise, we're going to end up with problems and difficulties and solutions that are suboptimal. And it is a challenge that we face, Ian, And so, which is why I say it is such an important area. But increasingly, and within the context of fisheries, you would be aware that we have been looking at our governance frameworks to ensure that we enshrine these participatory processes in our decision-making process, in our planning, and really make a significant effort. I mean, one of the things that we have been doing at the CRFM, and that has been helping a lot with this, is just facilitating the communication, exchange of information, and having these types of sessions where we begin to talk with each other and ensure that everybody has the opportunity to participate in the dialogue, because this is a part of it. Of course, this is only the first step. And we have developed, and our council has adopted some policies in recent time to ensure that we have a proper policy framework for ensuring more structured engagement. So in recent years, we have had policies focused on incorporating and ensuring that the voices of fishers are taken on board, and there's a place for them in the discussion regarding blue economic growth generally. We also have a policy dealing with gender and for vulnerable members of our fishing communities, as well as youth, ensuring that we are hearing from everybody. So extremely important to ensure equity in social equity in the programs and policies and measures and projects that we develop.
I think it's a really, really important question as well. A really valuable question. How do we get to move with the beneficiaries to improve their economic loss? And to me, one of the very first things I think we need to do is identify the gaps to improve economic resilience for the sector. So we need to look at what currently obtains for the sector, what are the gaps, and the barriers as well to that sort of transition to more effective, more sustainable, more economically beneficial activity in fisheries. And as Milton says, it requires conversations with the fisher folk. There's no point in attempting, I think over the years we've used a sort of top-down approach to development. It hasn't worked effectively. And we see it all the time. So we need to engage in the discussions, but the beneficiaries need to be aware of the constraints, need to be aware of the potential opportunities and the barriers as well. Now, they know a lot more about what the circumstance is than we do. Well, maybe we should know as much as they do, but we need to fully understand, they also need to fully understand what is available to them potentially. It requires outside the box thinking. We can't go into transitions with the same approach, business as usual approach to decision making, to improvements in the sector that has not borne fruit over the years. So we need to embrace changes we see taking place today. Our beneficiaries need to be fully aware of what the barriers are, and they know the barriers probably better than we do. We need to identify the gaps and find some solutions to addressing those. Insurance, because fisheries is considered a high-risk sector, it hasn't benefited from the traditional types of donor support or financing that other sectors, agriculture and others, benefited from. So I know we've been struggling over the years, and I say we, the collective we, over the years, and trying to find solutions to the transition to more effective sector. We also have the cultural norms that kind of prevent us from advancing. We need to consider those. We have traditions that define how we operate at sea. Some of those we need to sort of leave behind if we hope to transition. So it has to be a whole of sector type improvement that starts from within, but it's a collective process. It has to be both the beneficiary and our governance mechanisms working together to explore what the opportunities are. The thing also is, we're working against a changing environment. Fish is scarcer now, both from the inshore reef and you know from Milton this morning, with all the impacts of climate change on our marine ecosystems. Resources are not there like they used to be before. So we also have that challenge to transition to a system that allows us to target resources that are dwindling, maybe at a different place, a different type, we require different gear and methods, and which will require investments as well. So there's no easy solution to this, but it requires a whole of sector approach to defining gaps and opportunities. And every gap is an opportunity. So but these are the approaches I think that we can use to addressing this.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Sure. So I would just note that our pilot project with CRFM is working through a cooperative. And I think, to be honest, that's one of the best ways in which one can engage with fisher folk in this context, because once you start looking at climate, carbon offsetting, carbon footprinting, all of this type of stuff is not necessarily that relevant to an individual fisher person. They're connecting into much larger value chains. And Belize has a policy that allocates much of the resource to cooperatives. And so the manner in which we've engaged with this through their board of directors and trying to identify what their priorities are, I think has been a productive approach, and is something that can only really be addressed at cooperative level, because it simply doesn't have the same kind of value or relevance to fisher folk who are working individually, and there's a need to create that cooperative spirit and cooperative enterprise to tackle these types of challenges. It's very challenging to do on your own. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Yes, go ahead, Cristelle.
Thank you. Just a really quick comment to that question, because it's a very important one. And in fact, over the last couple of days, I've been getting to know a few micro, small, medium enterprise entrepreneurs from not just the Caribbean, but also, the Pacific and Sao Tome Principe from the African SIDS, who are also, very much doing their part. But what is quite confronting is that they aren't at the table being involved in consultations and making the very, very important decisions. And yet when you hear the discussions and the rhetoric, if you like, within, the climate COPs and so on, their suggestion is, well, grant resources will definitely not be enough to address, the challenges we face, and we need to unlock private investments and so on. But we have our own private sector, and I think, and it's at a different scale, but nevertheless they can make some really significant contributions. And so this principle of inclusivity, I think we need to really think about it all the time. Milton might be able to do some comparisons of the various ministerial meetings that the OACPS have had over the years. But at the 7th ministerial meeting held in Accra, Ghana, we in fact involved not just our member states, but also our competent regional technical agencies such as CRFM, but also our regional fisheries, civil society organisations, or our regional fisheries associations across the ACP, and they were able to really interact and have a really good exchange, and are reflected in some of the better decisions, I would offer, made in the declaration. which really considers small-scale fishers and artisanal fishers. So it is really very much about those genuine consultations that Milton talked about, but we have to be genuine. I think sometimes we say that we consult, but we don't normally. But I think the other thing that we've got to also think about is the multiple sectors that have to come to be brought to bear, and we can't, we can't just think about the fisheries and aquaculture sector in isolation. And so while that's complicated, nevertheless, involving all of the various sectors in some of these conversations, as well as important stakeholders and actors going forward, will be absolutely crucial to whether we succeed or not. And I also offer that the central agencies are really very important. The central agencies for economic planning and finance, the central our foreign ministries, our foreign affairs ministries are important because they often either decide on your budgets or decide on many things in the multilateral spaces, where decisions that impact us happen. But we need to, I think, be very, very conscious that it's a whole of government, it's a whole of country effort, and then it's a whole of regions, and then it's intra-regions. And of course, it's the whole world that needs to do something about it. But I do, I said it earlier, and I really do believe the potential of how SIDS unite, not just in these sorts of meetings, but unite on everything, to solve, to own how we solve our problems and the world's problems. I think we have such a contribution to make, and that will only be if we include everybody. We can't do it alone. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Duggins?
I wanted to highlight, and it's been said here, the fact that here we are, side event at SIDS, and we are in a discussion. But if you look around the room, we have fisher folk in the room. All the fisher folk here, or if there are any here, could you identify yourself? Correct. So the idea is that we have fisher folk involved in these discussions. And I could say that over the last 21 months that I've been involved with this ministry, I have been to a number of engagements, and they were present in one form or another, whether it was locally on the ground, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent, here in Antigua, or anywhere throughout the region that I have been. They have been present. And that is fundamentally part of the entire process, because if their voice are part of creating the policy, and that policy is then taken to whichever level it is, even as it is here now, going into these discussions at SIDS, then ultimately the benefit trickling back down should be down to exactly where it started, with the voice of the fisher folk. And so I think that is a critical component to ensure that their voices form the nucleus of action that moves forward.
I'd like to go to one of our online attendees, who's Mr. Douglas.
To the Honorable Minister and to the esteemed panel. To the speaker, we will just identify the All Tobago fisher folk. We do appreciate it. We come out of Tobago. And some of the observation we would have observed over the years, even in this presentation, is that there was not enough emphasized on the pollution from this energy company. It has been hardly touched to their contribution to climate global warming, right? And I think we should pay a lot of attention, because on the 7th of February, 2024, Tobago would have experienced a massive oil spill that would have affected the Caribbean. So these are some of the areas we believe that coming out of Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, we would like to see a bit more fisher folk on the panel to really explain because we are talking about pollution, about two-stroke and four-stroke engines, but we are not talking about the sustainability
That's
of
what
the
we
food
were thinking
security.
of here.
Like, so we have to understand, because the community that are affected, as the first speaker was talking about, are the poor community, and the people, the boats that is more or stay longer contribute more. These are some of the big trawlers, contribute more pollution. The small man pollution is not as much as that. So these are some of the things and the direction I would like to just share with the panel and the group in moving forward, and to even have some form of you know um some form of buffer whereby if we are to engage in electrical vehicle, where are the conditions, where are the suppliers? Is there some form of transition to take? And it all boils down again to finance. And these are low income earners in the fishing industry, even though the entire Caribbean fishing industry is a multi-billion dollars industry. So I would like to see a bit more emphasis and fisher folk itself on some of these panels, so that they could relate and speak to the day-to-day activities and what we are experiencing in the waters of the Caribbean. Thank you.
What is the economic contribution of the fisheries from your case study to the economy of Belize? And therefore, why should the fisheries sector be prioritized as part of farming as a driver for the economy of Belize moving forward? Thank you.
The assessments that we made were based on revised NDCs that were, provided by our countries into the UNFCCC process, and we assessed those just to get a sense of what the priority sectors are for our member states, and what the quantum of need is in terms of resources for both adaptation and mitigation under the NDCs. We know that in the negotiations there has been an amount of 100 billion, since the Paris Agreement mentioned time and again a pledge of 100 billion, and in fact, there was an announcement made at COP28 that they had managed to reach that, but it was in some ways quite underwhelming, because that should have been reached a very long time ago. So the idea for me of pledges is sometimes a pledge could be a promise, but it also could be an empty promise. However, just in terms of the allocations and gaps, the intention of the OACPS SIDS-led Resource Mobilisation Conference for NDCs is for our member countries, and particularly our SIDS, to be able to convene and meet with potential financiers and partners with a prepared pipeline of projects, because I think that we've got to now move to that stage where we're saying we need access to climate finance, we need finance, but we need to say, actually, we need access and we need finance for XYZ. And of course, we can't do everything all at once. So the idea would be to focus in on some sectors. And so I mentioned what some of those sectors were for adaptation, coastal management and fisheries, for mitigation, energy, transport, and so on. And so I think that if we go with a considered portfolio, it would be far more compelling. And those resources would, of course, need to be programmed and delivered. And you would, it would not just be for government. I mean, those programs would have to involve many, many others to be able to achieve, the adaptation and mitigation objectives outlined in those NDCs. And I think that this could be a, sort of a considered approach of organising ourselves as SIDS and actually going to our partners and to the international community to be able to see how we attract, the necessary resources for us to be able to address achieving sustainability and building resilience. And so I'm sorry I haven't given you exact numbers, but so I've mentioned 28.7 billion for SIDS per annum. But the overall assessments that we made for the 79 countries is 1.32 trillion by 2030. And those are costed NDCs. So we're not pulling a number out of the air. It's, these are actual numbers that our countries have worked hard to actually, to be able to develop and demonstrate.
I'm Nicholas Watts. I currently chair the Independent Forum of Commonwealth Organisations, and thank you, Milton, for the warm welcome earlier. I have a point about interregional collaboration and another about policy coherence. I noticed, we have the regions represented on the panel, and I do wonder, with the upcoming Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa, and Samoa has been present here drawing attention to this, whether it isn't time to think about the coherence of institutional arrangements within regions. We have the 5 Cs and the CRFM in the Caribbean, and the Pacific Climate Change Center is now about 3 years old, so building on the 5 Cs policy. But is it not time to make the ask of Commonwealth heads that they put their heads together, so to speak, and come up with a policy approach that is coherent across the regions and where the policy community is listened to? My second point is about, when I talk about policy coherence, I wonder about the talk about the shift of economies to a tourism basis, when the marine resources for which tourists frequently travel are disappearing, so that you undermine your tourism sector if you don't deal with fisheries, marine resources, and aquaculture. I think there's the serious problem of fisheries and fishing communities, especially small-scale fishing communities, being politically marginal because they're at the margins, literally in terms of when voting starts, they're out at sea. And there's the lack of visibility, we know, of underwater, undersea life, if we think of SDG 14. And something needs to be done about improving the visibility of these issues. And I think, if we could move towards enhancing visibility of the fisheries sector, that would be wonderful. And I've heard mention of the culture of fishing communities, and my concern as an engaged with the Commonwealth Association of Museums is that many of these communities and many of these cultures will disappear before they're recognized, and we have then the record at least of what was. So I think maybe visibility and the culture through museums could be promoted. Thank you.
Okay, so you made mention of Commonwealth heads and policy setting for parents. I'm saying that policy has to come from us. That's it. We don't ask heads for the policy. I think, and as we in our conversations earlier clear, where I think we need to determine, sit together as SIDS and determine what our priorities are. What do we need the rest of the world to focus on as far as we're concerned? And we have to define that policy ourselves. So we are meeting, and today I think there's a meeting with the Pacific Commission, and that is 5 Cs and SPREP. We are forging those relationships, we're strengthening those relationships. There is a visit by SPREP to Belize next week. to meet with us in 5 seasons. This is a continuing series of engagements we have with them to sort of strengthen the relationships, and we have to extend that to the Indian Ocean countries as well. And yeah, so we're and maybe other African states. So that is happening, maybe not fast enough, but at least there's some very concrete discussions being had right now to sort of build and formulate maybe an approach to addressing our situation as it's. So that is happening as we speak. The tourism, yes, it's a case of tourism destroying itself. Eventually, what attracts tourists to our area is no longer going to be there. We've been in the early days mining beach sand to build hotels, the same beaches that the tourists wanted to lounge on and everything as it is because we use sand beaches to build hotels. But you're right, we have diminishing resources. They're impacted by extreme weather events, and we're embarking on a tourism product that is uncertain for the future. So at some point in time, we need to examine our priorities against the realities of climate change within the region. But that's a bigger discussion needs to be had. And visibility of the fishery sector, absolutely, yes, I totally agree with you. Some museum, something that enhances, it is a vital part of our economies. We grew up with fisheries, it was a mainstay of economies way back then. But not given as much attention as it requires now, but I totally agree that it needs to have a lot more visibility, and maybe that would attract a lot more sort of investments into the sector itself. That's it for me for now. Thanks.
The issue of coherency, policy coherency, it's a big issue. It's an issue at the national level. And we need to do much more to ensure that our policies are more coherent across sectors. Remains a big challenge for us, fisheries, environment, agriculture, industry, all of these things. We still have a challenge in the region, but we're working on it. And we need to continue. And the ACP and other similar mechanisms are very important organizations and networks that's bringing us together. So we are making progress, but I do think we also need to give a little more priority to it. And that's the other point I wanted to emphasize, the issue of priority, because that is so important. And yesterday, you weren't a part of the session, but we did spend some time looking at the ocean economy and the priority being given to it, and the fact that it is really not fully appreciated, the value of the ocean resources, the value now and the value of these resources for the future. In my opinion, our ocean resources are the single most important national asset that we have for our long-term sustainable development. And we discussed that yesterday. But I think the message still needs to be trumpeted, and we really need to ramp up our efforts to improve visibility, to improve understanding among our people, starting with our school children, of the opportunities that we have in the ocean sector and the need to pay attention. You see, we're talking about resilience. We're talking about self-reliance and sufficiency so that we can stand on our own feet, especially in times of difficulty. We have been through an economic crisis some years ago. We have been through the COVID pandemic, and that has opened our eyes to a lot of things. So I do hope that we will take advantage of our recent experiences to reevaluate our priorities going forward for long-term economic development and ensuring that we choose a path where we develop and utilize all the available resources on land and at sea and under the seabed to ensure that we have much stronger, more resilient, and more sustainable economies going forward. I mean, it's imperative and it requires, again, a lot of investment and effort to move us from where we are now to where we need to go. And within our little sphere, we're trying to address these things, but they require not only money, but institutional, organizational resources and experts. And, all of these are limiting, but, we need to continue to address these things and hopefully together build that resilient, sustainable future that we aspire to achieve. Thank you.
Need to acknowledge within our regions quite what I would say quite sophisticated, quite mature regional architecture, and within the Caribbean, within the Pacific, and for the African SIDS who find themselves both straddling the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean, they are working towards setting up an organisation so that they can work together. What is needed is to have that intra-regional or SIDS regional cooperation and organisation. And we already have a relationship with the Commonwealth. And I just offer there that, in the case of the ACP or the OACPS, we do, all of our members are developing vulnerable countries from Africa, the Caribbean and the Pacific. And then we have 39 small island developing states as members. And so that coherence does become important. But we need to, I think, as Keith says, start from our regions and then see how we build, a SIDS policy framework that really resonates with the three SIDS regions. The ministerial, the Commonwealth ministerial meeting in Cyprus, not too long ago, and the Ocean Declaration, which will be considered and adopted by or at the CHOGM, is something that will be important for us, and we hope that it doesn't just outline the Commonwealth's policy priorities, but those policy priorities resonate with, sort of a SIDS prioritised agenda. Because Samoa is part of the OACPS, Samoa is currently the chair of AOSIS, and I have quite a close relationship with the ambassador of Samoa in Brussels, who also covers the UK. She keeps me well appraised of how things are going and often checks back in. In fact, she has asked if I could cast my eye over the declaration, and I think for that we need to consult again, this inclusivity and consultation, with members that do have quite an important stake, in matters. And so I think policy coherence is really important, but it has to start from, I see it as nested governance, if you like. So we need to see how the different organizations within the institutional ecosystem, how they relate to each other. There's a lot, I think, that the existing regional architecture in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, and in the African SIDS that we can learn from.
Every chance I get to be at a meeting, I'm there. Now the fishers are there. But we don't go beyond this. Right? And we have a lot to contribute. So how do we get from this? Because there's no fishers at SIDS. There will be no fishers where you are in there. There will be no fishers. At anything above us, there's no fishers. So we feel like we've been dictated to. Right? We've been dictated to. Because we have this, when we pose our concerns, when they go up, they go up at something else. And then a regulation comes down to us as something else. Right? So we feel, like he's saying, we don't feel visible because we don't go beyond this. So how do we get fishers part of all, like a fisher up there? 2, 3, fishers the next meeting, 5, 6, something. How do we get, because we have a lot to contribute. And we have concerns about this that needs to be aired to. But all we get when we are, especially, okay, I'll speak about my country, all we get is that we're hindrance. We don't contribute much. That's all we get. We need to have fishers' involvement beyond this. Up there. Thank you.
Let me share from online. We had Mr. Ramon Carcomo earlier, who said that the implementation of the SSF guidelines can contribute to addressing the many challenges presently faced by SIDS. It's been over 10 years since the SSF guidelines were adopted, and very little has been done to implement the guidelines. And then he asks, what are the present plans to action the SSF guidelines? So later on, we'll ask a panelist to address that. And meanwhile, we go back to Cristelle.
It's unfortunate, in fact, that that Caribbean small-scale fishers were not present at the 7th ministerial meeting held in Accra, Ghana. We did have representation from the African Confederation of Professional Organisations of Fishers, so CALPA. I don't know if you're aware of, yes, CALPA. LMMA also sent representation. And I do understand that we had reached out to the Caribbean and have not received responses, but we did make every effort. So I want you to write in your little book the dates of the 9th to the 13th of September, because we would very much welcome and yes. So what we will, yes.
I would fund myself and I'll fund somebody else. But we need to get fishers' involvement because they feel really bad about it.
Absolutely. And
Right?
so one of the things that we have also done, and after the 7th meeting held in Accra, Ghana, we also had a side event, especially for small-scale fisheries and for artisanal fishers, where we allowed them to actually participate in the 2nd UN Ocean Conference, looking at progress on SDG 14, but also to celebrate, you know, the year for artisanal fisheries and aquaculture. So I will get your name and your contact details, because, in fact, we were disappointed that that, you know, certainly Milton and others from the Caribbean ministers were present, but it would have been very good to have had small-scale fishers at the table. So this year in Tanzania, I look forward to being able to see you there and participating in the meetings.
I'm hopeful that it's not just me. I'm hopeful it's not just me.
No, but you can be the contact to your networks, which would be very good. Yeah,
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haughton.
Right. Just to follow up on this question, as well as the question posed by Ramon Carcomo, because they're connected in some way, and to point out that we have the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organization, and the network has been very, very, very active in advocating and representing the interest of fishers. And it's very important to have that fisher organizational mechanism that you can relate to. So they're members of the Caribbean Fisheries Forum, which is the technical body that discuss technical scientific issues and make recommendations to the Ministerial Council for decision making within the CRFM. In addition, we have regular meetings with the CNFO and usually representatives from all the countries Just following up on various issues. So with respect to the SSF guidelines, we have been working with the CNFO to ensure that their needs and concerns regarding the SSF guidelines are actually addressed. So we have actually a protocol as a part of the Common Fisheries Policy, which was spearheaded by the fishers themselves, supported by others, including Surmees, as part of the University of the West Indies. And they developed the protocol on addressing small-scale fisheries issues. And that protocol was approved by the Ministerial Council and quoted and is a part of the Common Fisheries Policy. We have more recently developed a number of additional instruments, again spearheaded by the fisherfolk, their own organization, in consultation with the CRFM. For example, the action plan dealing with the 20 by 20 objectives. I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but reducing food import bill by 25% by 2025. Again, working with the CNFO, they actually led with the development of the action plan for the small scale fishers to contribute to that objective. So they also worked with the fishers closely to develop a plan for ensuring that fishers are engaged in the dialogue and development of plans, project strategy, etc., for the blue economic plans and policies at the national level. So what I'm saying here really is that there is at this time quite vibrant interaction with representatives of the small-scale fishers through the CNFO in addressing a whole range of issues, and we meet with the CNFO quite regularly. And the small-scale fisheries guideline that Mr. Carcamo has referred to has been an integral part of our policies, our plans, our work program, where we take this instrument into account and factor in the measures and activities needed to ensure that we are in fact giving adequate priority to implementing the guidelines in our various programs. So projects that we have, all the projects that we have now, have been informed by the provision and commitment of the guidelines, and they are implemented. This instrument, SSF guideline, is being implemented through the various projects, activities, etc. That we have. Almost all of them have been informed by the commitment.
Thank you. And that ties in well with what Mr. Curtis Douglas had said earlier. He emphasized the need for fisher folk to also be a part of panels like this. So perhaps maybe next time having one at the head table, but also looking at that wider conversation about the transition, especially retooling the sector when you're talking about different types of engines, for them to be more actively engaged and involved in the dialogue, decision making, and so on. I know you talked about the CNFO, but not every fisher belongs to an NFO, to a fisher folk organization. And so how do we get all those players engaged in this dialogue? So we're winding down. We do have some other questions, but we can take some additional interventions from the panel.
Just a very quick one, because during the 7th ministerial meeting, there was a call to action from small-scale fishers, and that's recognised in the declaration of OACPS ministers. And that particular call to action was tabled by CALPA together with a range of other fisheries organisations from the Pacific, from Central and South America, Asia and Europe. And so it does embrace the small-scale fisheries guidelines, which are also reflected in the Strategic Plan of Action for Fisheries and Aquaculture 2030, adopted by ministers in a couple of years ago. But I think it goes back to that whole question of inclusivity and making sure that including all key actors as an underpinning imperative of everything that we do in future, so that we have well-informed decisions and appropriate decisions to be able to build resilience as well as achieve sustainability. So thank you for your question. And the question online.
Thank you too.
Convention on Biodiversity's meeting is taking place in Cali, Colombia this year. So it's pretty close by. It's in October. And mainstreaming biodiversity into the fisheries sector is a topic there. So fisheries and blue ocean biodiversity is a topic that's being discussed. It's just a bit later.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add, because since it came up a couple of times, the CNFO, they weren't able to participate in the Ghana meeting of the ministers responsible for OACP, but they did submit to me some suggestions and for inclusion in the presentation and discussion on sustainable small-scale fisheries. So through that way, they were able to have their concerns addressed, and we did share the information that we got from the small-scale fishers at that meeting. So just wanted to mention that.
No, absolutely. Ali Bisram, I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, but I now reside in the coastal cities in South Florida, where there's a huge diaspora community, and I run an ECOSOC accredited NGO, and we work really on the intersection of, I love the people-centered question, on human resiliency and planet resiliency, and really putting well-being at the center. And some of that includes tapping back into the wisdom that already exists in people, like in Samoa and other places. And part of it also is the work that we've been doing involves some of the listening and also just getting people to fall in love with nature again, and that includes the change makers and the beneficiaries, or the folks that are most vulnerable. So I have a question that perhaps it's zooming out a bit from this conversation on just on fisheries, but I think it's connected because we've in the presentations heard a lot the words loss and stress and disaster, and the work that we do with our partners is really around filling the gap of social, emotional, psychological resiliency. That's often kind of like an afterthought, and it goes beyond hiring psychologists and etc. The WHO at COP last year had their first climate and health event, and specifically mental health, eco-anxiety, that I realize that there's a real physical need, but then at what point, so my question is really within some of the mechanisms you've presented on, and particularly the vulnerability index, are we incorporating this component? That is a huge factor in resiliency, because ultimately it impacts our physical health as well, and our ability to be engaged. Because if you're burnt out, you're not going to even engage, even if you have the opportunity. And if you don't have the finances to participate, you're not going to be at the table. So it's all connected, and it's totally connected to climate justice as well. So I'd appreciate any interested in opportunities also for funding, because these are the places where we have to be creative in finding funding to do our work, because there's no mechanism that focuses just on this component. Thank you.
Very important question. And as you mentioned that, I remember a few years ago visiting a few communities in Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as a part of a study looking at the impact of sargassum on the communities. And as we met and interacted with the community, it really struck me how much anxiety and concerns existed in the communities, just talking to the women and children and so on, regarding the problem of the sargassum inundation and the decay and the terrible smell generated by the sargassum, which is toxic, by the way, and the anxiety that was causing, because people just didn't understand, what is this? You know, they're dealing with this really foul-smelling hydrogen sulfide gas being released, and it just continued, and there are all type of concerns and information about heavy metals and so on. And they were getting bits and pieces, but really didn't quite understand what this means for them. And I see the need for this type of thing, for this and greater engagement with our health agency. We have CARFO, Carbon Public Health Agency, and I think there's a very important role for them to play in these types of situations, and I think this is only going to get worse. So we do have to put in place, in my opinion, more robust systems to address the mental, psychological, emotional dimension. It is really not something that we're competent to deal with. And so you do need people with the specialization and competency in the area to get involved and to address this. I know there are some NGOs and so on that provide, you know, some support, and that's fantastic. But you know, at the policy level, I think more recognition needs to be given to this dimension of human welfare. You know, we're thinking about some of the basic things like food and shelter and so on. But at the end of the day, the emotional and mental and psychological dimension is just so important for people to function and to enjoy their lives. So I think it's a gap. Even though, you know, there's more and more attention being given to it now, it's nowhere near enough, especially given the changes and the challenges and the impacts and the stresses that our people, especially, you know, our women and young children who are less visible, have to deal with and cope with on an ongoing basis. And I tell you, when I saw the situation with the sargassum, it was really concerning. Yes, I realize that a lot more needs to be done. Yeah, and sometimes it's just a matter of having dialogue, talking to the people, explaining, and you know, sharing the information we have with them. But it is something I think we need to focus more on. So very good point. And I think we should.
Thank
you. We are required in every project that we develop, we include a section on environmental and social safeguards, and that would fall under the social safeguards in every project. So we do it as a matter of routine. We have ESS, what we call ESS policies, the whole range of policies from gender, stakeholder, environmental, social as well. So it's possible we have not embraced fully the social consequences of those impacts, but we are obligated to doing this, and it's a function of every single project that we land.
And perhaps part of the question is that you don't have to build it. Where's the space for us to come help you build it is part of it.
And we do hire consultants to help build those requirements and obligations within the project, because we don't have all the skill sets, and that's why we use partners to help us address those issues. We need to build them into the projects.
Just on the multidimensional vulnerability index, we know that it's really been sort of a 30-year advocacy program for SIDS that's been led by SIDS, and mainly due to the fact that, you know, of course, the obvious that we are confronted by we are increasing in vulnerabilities and they are multidimensional. But the main purpose has been to encourage looking at an instrument to access grant and concessional finance beyond the only instrument that's used at the moment, which is GNI per capita. And many of our SIDS have graduated from LDC status, and yet, and they're being punished in a way for actually having really worked hard at building their, you know, development and and so on. So with the MVI, we've actually followed some fairly specific criteria to contribute to the UN MVI. So there's a bigger, more global process about the MVI. And in fact, in the SIDS-4 outcome document, there's a greater recognition and a heightening acceptance from developed countries, from some OECD countries. The European Union are expressing support for an MVI. So what we need to do is to get that acceptance and then to start to use it. For the OACPS, we developed an MVI which is a little bit different to the UN MVI in that it's more universal, because the UN MVI actually only looks at developing countries and pitches them against each other. We felt that, in fact, we needed to look at universal multidimensional vulnerability. And so we've taken data that's available universally that covers as many member states as possible. So that's one of the criteria that we've used. And we've used very simple indicators and not many, because some of the multilateral financing institutions have said that maintaining an MVI will just be too cumbersome and expensive. And so, of course, you know, they would like to and prefer to use GNI as the determinant. So the UN MVI, as well as ours is a little bit simpler. There's fewer indicators, but it covers economic, social, and environmental indicators, and it's based on the best available data in terms of coverage, so that it gives the tool some transparency and the ability for it to be replicated or reproduced more easily and maintained by our members. The more recent initiative of ours to develop a climate vulnerability and resilience index, again, we'll just use very few indicators, and again based on data. And we have only just started that development, and part of the work towards COP29 will be to consult with organisations such as KEEPS, the 5 Cs, with SPREP, with FFA, with SPC, with and so on in the Pacific, with CARICOM and others, to make sure that the tool is appropriate for our purpose. And the idea again being to use it, and for our countries to be able to use it as a way to access grant and highly concessional finance, because many of our countries and many in the Caribbean don't have access to that, and this is the reason why they're so indebted. So your question about whether we have these very specific health indicators, to be frank, we don't, unless the WHO and other global data centres have collected information. But as part of our work, we're hoping to actually build country profiles and regional profiles so that we can actually infuse them with our data and to collect data that's appropriate for us, because we do feel that the MVI will evolve. However, what we want, the big underlining objective that we have, is that the MVI will become a tool to determine access to grant and concessional finance for all SIDS and vulnerable developing countries, irrespective of their income status. Because that is the most, I mean, in fact, that is one of the most overwhelming and challenging things for our countries at this time. And so that's the reason why we've invested time and effort in developing the tool. We're working with the government of Malta and the University of Malta on developing the tool. And they have quite a long history in this area, mainly on economic vulnerability indices. But I think this multidimensional vulnerability index provides, sort of a much richer and a much more robust and considered way of demonstrating why we need access to finance and access to highly concessional finance and grant finance going forward for all SIDS, regardless of income. But these matters of sort of health, sort of what we do when we access the finance, I think it's at that point that it becomes extremely important to look at all facets of what it means to achieve sustainability and, importantly, to build resilience. And it will have to include all of the various sectors, going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a question from online.
Murray from based on the CRFM Secretariat. I had wanted to point to three issues. One, the importance of psychosocial considerations in looking at vulnerability. And that came out very clearly when an assessment was done after Hurricane Emily in Grenada. The second thing I wanted to point to is that in terms of the involvement of the CNFO, the CRFM Secretariat Milton has already alluded to it. But just to point out, for example, we're coming up to looking at developing the project implementation plan for the Starfish project, and CNFO has been invited and will be involved in the discussions on that coming up on the 7th of this month. Of June. But in terms of the whole question of importance, vulnerability, visibility, that linkage, I think the lady has already spoken to my concern in that regard, that GDP and GNI are inadequate in terms of determining where we need to go. And the MVI actually provides a mechanism to help us create the fiscal space necessary to overcome some of the structural and external vulnerabilities and build resistance. So I think it's important that we start to push as much as possible and support the development of MVIs.
In Grenada, you said in St. Vincent, those places, the insurance business has been working well for the fisher folks. Pertaining that, you said they haven't even made a claim. Because I think in Grenada and those places up there, they mostly fish for pelagics. And so most of the boats has all the equipment with them, the long line equipment. So once the boat is okay, everything is okay. In Antigua now, we fish more, we do more refishing. So we use a lot of traps. Most boats fish with 100 traps, 200 traps. And so whenever there's a weather pending, sometimes you advise bringing your traps. But you imagine 10 boats trying to bring in 200 traps, and you can see the confusion down at the port. Not only that, once the traps are exposed to the elements on land after being in the sea for a little while, they deteriorate very quickly. So the insurance now in our place, in our situation, would be much, much different. Has anyone given consideration or any thought to branching out Antigua, what it will be like? Thank you.
Okay, if I may quickly respond, the insurance I was talking about, the main one, the coast, it's a policy that the government will purchase for the sector. And it is not dependent on the loss that you suffer. It is dependent, it's triggered. If a particular event or threshold is met. For example, if you're hit by and this is not the reality, it's just giving an example. If you're hit by a Category 3 hurricane, for example, a payout is made, whether or not, and regardless of the loss you suffer. So there are certain trigger events. If those are met, then the payout will be made to the government or to whoever the government designates, for the rebuilding of the fisheries sector or to compensate individual fishers and so on. So those details are worked out in the policy when the government negotiates the policy and the government pays for it. Now, separate and apart from that, there is the type of private insurance that you're talking about. where a private insurer will sell the fisher or the enterprise a policy to cover their losses. Chris is also looking at working out that type of policy, and I know there are other insurers who are interested in providing that type of policy for the fishery sector. In fact, CRIF has what they call a livelihood protection basic policy, very, very basic, where you pay a small amount and you get a quick payout after you suffer some hazard. But going forward, I do hope that more governments will consider the parametric policy that the government purchases for the fishery sector, and it is the exact arrangements would be negotiated with the government and the CRIF and the appropriate payout made. So this is something that I think Fisher should be talking with the government representatives about, and in my opinion, lobbying them to sign on to this type of policy, because it is in the interest of the industry generally.
Okay, I know Grenadian, so as an Antigua government, are you in position to tell me if our government in Antigua has
No, they're not a part of it.
Yeah.
So far, it is only two, and a number of other countries are looking at it and having discussion with CRIF to join and take out the policy for their country and their fisheries. Yeah.
Mavis George. Quickly, I was just thinking about some recommendations from some of the things that were said. Now, if we're going to try to get persons involved seriously in the fishery sector and contribute, we have to get it in the schools. We have to let the government know. If you notice, no school have fisheries on their sub areas. They have agriculture science. So what does that say? Fisheries is not important. For them to take us seriously, we have to get people at the top to let them, to pressure the government, to let them know that you need to get the universities to have a program for the schools so that the students, they're the next generation. Most of the fisher folks now will die and go off. What do they know? What do these young people know? So that they can be successful planning or sustainability for food security from this sector. So that is one that has to be done. And the other thing, in terms of the insurance, because I know the government's going to say they have no money. So can this go through maybe like the car? Can they negotiate things like that? And maybe, try to find proper insurance, not only for gears, but for boats and also for loss of income, so that persons can, can feel a little more comfortable, and also look at this as a viable industry. Because if I'm going to go in an industry and a hurricane pass and everything is disappear and that's it, and nobody cares except somebody send me 2 fish pot wire, it's not viable to maintain my family. And if you notice, I think it was Ambassador Joseph who said yesterday, fisheries is the only sector that bounces back after hurricanes. But that's only if you're going after the pelagics. Because if you're going after the demersals, most of your traps are going to be disturbed. So unless you're not going to do something like hook and line or something, you're not going to gain enough to recover and to refinance what you have lost. So that is also important. And in reference to financing, and it's reaching down to the poor sector, finances tend to come. But guess what it does? It supports a consultancy writing a consultant plan. So it's only the people in the middle area receive the finance, and it doesn't trickle down to the lower people. So we need to have the consultancy is important, but after that, what? It stays on somebody's desk. So we need to ensure that whatever finance come down benefit the persons it's really intended to, and even get them to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, lady.
My name is Okama Ekwebrook, and I'm representing today the Caribbean Studies Association. That is an association that is established in Trinidad and Tobago, and we look at Caribbean issues from an interdisciplinary, multicultural, multidisciplinary perspective. So as the president this year, I chose St. Lucia to host my 48th annual conference. We have over 1,000 members who are coming from all over the world to share their research. And I'm so happy that Nichols, who is sitting here, he is the chair of our environment working group. And he's organizing a field trip during the conference in St. Lucia to visit a fishing community. And the whole idea is that we can engage not only from a scholarly perspective or presentations, we can actually touch base with what is happening at the community level and link those fisher folks with our diasporans, with other Caribbean people who can support this process. So, Madam, it would be so awesome if, as a result of the field visit that we are having, we can have a fisher folk from St. Lucia participate in the Tanzania conference. So he's here, I'm tasking him to, he doesn't have the funding, but perhaps this is something we could look at, to have the gentleman from Antigua, representing Antigua and Barbuda, and a fisher folk from St. Lucia, and maybe have a collective that can go and then bring back that information to share here with us.
I want to springboard off that though, because we have to wrap up, but I'd like to tie in with our first question that was asked by Mr. Horsford that had to do with equity, justice, because oftentimes a big part of the problem is that we do not have a level playing field, whether it's a national level or the global level. And then thinking about the initiative that you just mentioned, the partnerships, the importance of those partnerships. We have many partners here in this room, as well as online. And I want to ask, what can we as partners do to collectively ramp up the pressure, one, on the larger developed countries whose economic activities are harming SIDS through adverse accelerated climate impacts, and two, at the national level, the sectors and the industries within SIDS that are the drivers of adverse, and I'll borrow Mr. Haughton's term, synergistic impacts on our marine environment and our living marine resources. Would anyone like to take that?
The discussion is had at the UNFCCC Conference of Parties. This is why, we're going into the 29th meeting of the COP in Azerbaijan this year, and this has been the focus of those discussions over the years. There are many other sidebar meetings, the G20, G77, and so on, that all get towards reducing emissions and to reducing impacts on our sectors, particularly for vulnerable SIDS like ours. So the conversation continues, the pressure is on. We are negotiating the terms of reductions of emissions through AOSIS. And like I said, the conversations continues. There's a massive global program aimed at sort of bringing some sort of normalcy to a situation that is spiraling out of control as it is. So yeah, in short, this is what it is. The conversations continue. We are part of the process. We contribute to the discussions. Negotiators have assigned responsibilities for addressing the various thematic areas under, and it becomes a bit more complex, but the conversations continue. And the pressure is put on the developed world to reduce emissions and reduce impacts on cities like ours.
Okay, so where do these partnerships play a role in ramping up that pressure? Yes, Cristelle.
I'll try to answer that. And in preparation for COPs, we do actually convene not only our members, but also our regional agencies. 5Cs have participated actively in COP preparations, going into COP preparations for an OACP Fisheries paper. We've done this over the last years, and we intend to do it for COP29. And amongst our competent regional agencies, we also include the various negotiating groups that we're linked to, so AOSIS, G77+, the African group of negotiators, and so on, so that we get a good sense of really how we can, collectively pursue our priorities and our, agenda within those negotiating rooms. So that's something that we can do collectively. But I think also beyond that, we need to take, while the negotiations are ongoing, we also need to translate some things into action. And this is where Keith and I were discussing that, SIDS perhaps need to take the bull by the horns and really think about how we organise ourselves as the 39 SIDS on the blue planet, and how we organise ourselves to not only unite and work together in negotiating rooms, but actually unite and work together on doing something for ourselves. Great. And to also promote the fact that we're not small, we're actually large, that we actually own, if I could say, or we have stewardship over 30% of this planet that we live on. Yes?
We 5Cs actually convenes meetings of negotiators. We had one in April. These are the technical negotiators. We've got another meeting in October ahead of COP. We bring the ministers together. So technical negotiators in the Caribbean who are assigned responsibilities are discussing the issues and helping to formulate a regional perspective on negotiating position. So in October, when we meet with the ministers of CARICOM, and we're working together with CARICOM Secretariat on this, we will sort of consolidate our negotiating position. We do this every year, so this is one way which we can infuse our own suggestions, our own concerns into negotiating briefs for CARICOM and for SID, but we do this under the banner of AOSIS as well. So we do that as a matter of routine to ensure that we have a say in the process and we contribute to the discussions in the hopes that we can achieve the outcomes that we established in the Paris Agreement.
The road to resilience is not an easy one. It's a rocky road. It's a choppy road, or choppy seas we have to sail through. But I think we just need to remain focused, to stand together, to build the partnerships, and to continue to advocate even more loudly for our interests. And it's really not just interest, it's our survival that's at stake. So we need to continue to raise our voices and engage with our partners so that they understand. And in my opinion, despite the challenges, despite the rocky road and the choppy waters, we will get there if we remain focused and if we stand together. We can achieve profitable, sustainable, and resilient economies based on the resources we have available to us, especially in our ocean space. We just need to remain focused and continue fighting.
I'd like to thank everybody for participating, those online, those in person. And I hope this is not the last in a series of engagement with stakeholders. To SIDS delegates and visitors, I encourage you to take advantage of beautiful Antigua and Barbuda. And I'll close off in saying basically walk good, as the Jamaican brothers and sisters would say.